Morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. We'll get started in just a minute. All right. Hello, and welcome to the Central Carolina Area Agency on Aging August webinar. And today our topic is hoarding and safety. We are very excited. So our next slide, we'll just go over our typical Zoom webinar features. If you've been with us before, you know the drill, but you're automatically muted whenever we're in this mode. You can't see the other participants, but you can see the hosts and the speaker. Any questions, just go ahead and throw those in the chat box and we'll get to those kind of at the end. The session is being recorded, and after today, this will be posted on our website, and you also will receive a certificate of attendance. So now I'm going to turn it over to Molly to introduce our speaker.
All right, today with us, we have Ms. Kelly Ransdell. She works for the National Fire Protection Association as their Director over Public Education. Kelly works to expand fire and burn education and just works with a lot of stuff, in particular with the National Fire Protection Association. I'll let her tell you guys more about herself, but she's a North Carolinian, she's a Carolina girl. And she does still live in North Carolina with her 2 daughters and her husband. And she does a lot of wonderful work. So Kelly, we can't wait for you to get started.
Thank you. I appreciate this opportunity very much. Yes, so I live just south of Raleigh in Fuquay. We always joke because I say I'm from South Boston because our office is actually headquartered in Boston, Massachusetts. So you can imagine when I go to our office, they immediately, when I open my mouth, say, "You're not from Boston." I'm like, "No, I'm not from Boston," but I do love Boston, but I love North Carolina more. And so it's always a pleasure to be able to work here. I am an NC State girl, but I'm also a pirate. And so I split my allegiances between my Wolfpack and my Pirates. Where I did my undergrad at State, I did my master's work at ECU. And I'm part of a group called the National Fire Protection Association. I worked here in the State Fire Marshal's office for 15 years, and I was the state director of Safe Kids North Carolina. And then in 2015, I joined NFPA's staff full time. And they were one of the organizations that I really respected the work they did. They've been around since 1896, been around a long time, and their whole work is around safety. And so when I joined their team, I never dreamed that I would have the opportunity to lead the public education division, and that promotion happened in May of this year. And so I'm newly the director there, but I've been doing that work since 2007 on the national scene, and then since 2000 here in North Carolina. And so we want to talk about hoarding disorder. I will give you this precursor to the topic because there has yet to be a presentation that I've done about this that at the end of it, someone hasn't said, "I am personally affected by this." And so within emergency services, but also with you working in the area agency on aging, I would dare say some of you experience this professionally and others of you will experience this personally. And so with that in mind, we are always very thoughtful in how we address this topic because it is a very sensitive one. It is one that we know more about now than we have known about, but it is a very complex issue. And so we at NFPA provide this education in conjunction with our Steps to Safety program, which we'll hear about a little later, but also in general for the fire service. And I would tell you that hoarding disorder has risen as far as the awareness of it because of several things. One that is a mixed how you perceive it can be very mixed is there is a TV show called Hoarders. Now, I will tell you that we are very intentional in calling it hoarding disorder because a person is not a hoarder. A person may hoard materials, but they are not a hoarder. That is a very derogatory sounding thing to characterize them because they're people first. And these are, in a lot of cases, people's loved ones. And so in spite of the fact that the TV show is called that, there was another one called Hoarding Buried Alive on TLC. There have been multiple ones across different TV channels. We also know that that has brought awareness to the topic. It has put a description of the topic. But then we've also seen our society change to where we have more. Used to be there was a TV shopping channel, but you had to pay shipping, and some people would use that TV shopping and they formed a relationship with the host. You can imagine if you're an older adult and you don't see people on a regular basis, you would think of that person as a friend. I will tell you, during COVID, every morning I turned on the Today Show, and I consider Al Roker and Savannah Guthrie and Hoda Kotb my friends, because in the mornings I was watching TV with them and there weren't a lot of other people around. We weren't getting out. And so that is a real thing, that they had a relationship. And so they may say, there's only 4 of these items left. You need to order right now. And so people would order things. We also have seen that online shopping has gotten easier and easier and easier. If you have ordering service, they will ship for no fee. It's very easy to get things without having to leave your home. And also delivery services of all things from food to equipment to gifts and other things can be delivered right to your home. So all of that has brought this topic to the forefront of a lot of people's mind, but it has also contributed to some of the folks that suffer from this disorder, because it has taken the stigma away from going in and getting a cart full of things when it can just be delivered to your home. And so some of the warning signs that we see with hoarding disorder is they have difficulty getting rid of things. We also know that the amount of clutter would be in their office, it would be at their home, in their car. If you've ever been out here in Fuquay, we have a Bojangles. And when we started teaching about this topic, I noticed this vehicle that the only spot that was open was the driver's seat. And it was stacked full of things. It has really opened my eyes to looking at things very differently. And then other spaces, of course, and it can make it difficult to use your furniture and appliances or even move around. And then sometimes they may lose important things like money or bills in the clutter. I know I have a stack that each week I go through. And so I would say, oh, I need to be more organized. But it's a matter of, because of the amount of things you have, things can slip. It may feel overwhelming because of the volume of things that have taken over the house or your workspace. You may be unable to stop taking free things. So maybe there's, if you have people leave their napkins on a table, and we know that during the pandemic, they had to throw those away. Well, it's very wasteful. And so if you're a person that's very conscious, you may say, well, I'll take all those napkins, and that way. Now, if you use them immediately, and we don't store them, but when you get them in bulk and bulk and bulk, and it becomes something you're fixated on, it can actually be a problem. When you buy things that are a bargain, or you stock up, but there's not a need for them, that can also be a warning sign. When you don't invite family and friends into your home because of the shame and embarrassment of it, and that's one of the things we see. There is a huge amount of shame with this, which is why we are so careful when we talk about this and sensitive to the fact of them being people that we love and people in our community that need our help. And then also when you refuse to let people come into your home to make repairs, and that's some of how this kind of breeds into other things. So all of these are warning signs. So one of the things I'd like to do, and if Molly and Caitlin don't mind, we'll let people put these in the chat. And so my question for you is, compulsive hoarders may be at risk for health issues due to the following things. All of them except which one? Sorry, y'all. Let me go back. It moved forward on me. I apologize. All right, let's see if it will stop, y'all. Sorry about that. Which of these things do you think that you have health risks from hoarding disorder? All of them except which one? If you wouldn't mind putting your answer in the chat, I'll let Molly and Caitlin look at it, and then I'll let them tell us what the answer is. Which one of these could be a risk for health things, with the exception of which one? Which one is not associated with this hoarding disorder? So we'll give it just a second. Thank y'all for participating. We're going to do a few of these this morning to make sure y'all are awake and had your coffee. Caitlin, I probably should have told you that. Sorry about that. I figured I'd keep you on your toes today.
No, that's okay. I'm seeing a lot of stroke, obesity, some various answers here. So
Absolutely. So the answer is actually one of the risk factors that it doesn't affect is actually obesity. It can cause fire hazards. It certainly has some unsanitary conditions. It could cause stroke and cardiac, and that is as a result of lots of the things and complexity of this issue. Now, here's another question for you. Which of the following is not a cause of compulsive hoarding behavior? And there's 4 of these listed here. Which of these is not a cause? Is it emotional stress of discarding things, an emotional attachment towards things, laziness or weakness of character, or perfectionism? Which of those is not a cause of this hoarding behavior?
more agreement on this one. Everyone's saying laziness.
That's exactly right. This is not laziness or a weakness of character. This is a mental health issue. And that is one of the things that we want you to make sure that you always keep in the forefront of your mind is this is a mental health issue. It is not that somebody is lazy or they don't have the fortitude to do this. There are many things involved in this. All right. And then how many Americans have hoarding disorder? And so I'm going to pull these up. And the 4 options are 1 million, 3 million, 6 to 15 million, or 20 million people. And so let's see what y'all think about the likelihood that people have hoarding disorder. Thank y'all for participating.
Seeing a lot of 3 million and 6 to 15.
Yeah, so actually it's between 6 and 15 million. Now, you may say, my goodness, that is a huge range. Well, that is a huge range. And part of it is because there has to be a diagnosis for it to be official. And that's why there's such one. This came actually out of the psychiatry.org. They have a whole page, and I gave you the reference there. They cite between 2 and 6% of the population. And so that is why there is this range. And we're learning more about this. But that is why the range is there, is because there are not exact numbers yet. Now that we do have a diagnosis code, we are learning more. But this is when people seek treatment, we're able to identify it. Now, the next question is, not all people that hoard excessively collect or save objects. Some people actually hoard animals. Would that be true or false? True or false? And I actually did a search this morning on this topic because I always think it's very cool for us to actually have information locally. And so I can tell you that this is actually true, that according to the American Humane Society, about 250,000 animals each year have been hoarded, and one had over 1,000. We had an incident near us in Holly Springs where 2 sisters had actually rescued a bunch of cats, and they ended up that they wanted to help them, but unfortunately it got out of hand and they couldn't control the numbers. And so you can imagine how complex that issue is, and we'll talk about it a little more. And then the next question is, hoarding behavior runs in families, and I think I've maxed out your comments. Caitlin, I don't know if they're still answering, but
this was actually a question that somebody asked initially, so perfect.
Okay. And the question is, true or false, hoarding behavior runs in families? And to keep us moving, that is actually true. 84% of families have a first-degree relative that has also received this diagnosis. And so it is a form of OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. There are other variations of it. That is just how we've been able to do it. But unfortunately, we do see that this mental health issue can run in families. And then lastly, hoarding symptoms are only seen in adults. And that's my last question for you is it only in adults that we see this? And I know for you, as you're working with the older adults, this is a question that we get a lot. And what we find is the average age is 50 that it's been documented, but it can start as early as 12 years old. And so there is normally something that happens. And so I will tell you early on, when I started doing this work, I did watch some of the shows. And the reason I did is I wanted to understand because they showcase the families. And one that I'll never remember was a little girl that her family moved every year. And when they got ready to move, she had too much stuff. And so her father burned all of her belongings. And so you can imagine a traumatic event is triggered. You know, she moved on. She did fine, actually, until her children grew up and moved away. And it sparked that loss that she had. And so that is just one example of something that you may not have enough stuff accumulated until later in life to where it's documented and diagnosed, but it can start early on in life. So what is hoarding behavior, and where do we see this? Well, this certainly would show you an example of where we have miscellaneous things. So there's clothes, there's newspapers, there's books, there's all kinds of things that are actually blocking this room. So this room would be an example of hoarding disorder because it can't be used for its intended purpose. Now, everybody's probably got a junk room in their house, and I always, because I teach this, we always have this conversation. And I can tell you that there is certain criteria for hoarding. Many of us probably have too much stuff, and that can be a blessing, it can be a curse. But we also know that there's a difference between that, and there's difference between collecting things and hoarding. So you'll see in the picture, this is a collection of these. It's very orderly, it's on display. People collect many things. And so in this case, the only issue is it is blocking a window, which that's kind of dangerous because we always talk about having two ways out. But maybe this is a sidebar place and it's sprinklered and we don't have that. But collecting is very different than hoarding on the right-hand side. You'll see that there's a variety of things. You can't see what's there. It's not in an orderly fashion, and it's not for display. It's just an accumulation of many things. And then the countertop here is cluttered. And that probably looks like my kitchen at breakfast on the school day because we eat breakfast. I need to do the dishes. I don't have time and I leave. But you can see that I'm using a toaster in this picture. We have a coffee maker. We have some food that needs to be put up, but it's a few things, but I can still use that countertop for its intended purpose. Versus on the other side, you'll see that there is no way to use that den in its normal fashion. There's nowhere to sit right there that I can sit and watch TV. I can't get to the electrical outlets. I can't get to the lamp in the corner. And this is an example of hoarding behavior. And so a couple of things have to be there for it to be considered hoarding disorder. And there's a few features that we talk about with it and why this happens. And there actually is a DSM-5 characterization for this. And it gives you what is hoarding disorder if you want to go and find that. But they value objects and they can't get rid of them for three usual reasons. The first is sentimental or emotional attachment. And that is, I have such strong feelings. So there was an example of a mother that lost their child, and she held on to everything, including the diaper pail, because that was the last piece of that child that she had. And I can understand that sentimental, emotional feeling with it. If you were to lose a loved one, young or old, you may have that sentimental, emotional attachment to the things that were theirs. The second thing is it useful? And I always use the example of, I love Chinese food, and it comes in these little containers that are reusable. And I usually fill them with food and give them away. And I tell people, don't send them back when I send you food in it. But that's an example. If I collected every one of them, or even plastic bags to be able to use at a later time or to recycle at some point, we may see it as a useful option. And then the last one is the beauty of it. And that is maybe you order things and buy things because it is so beautiful and you love it so much. And so you have this attachment to it for the beauty of it. So those are three things that may drive you into having their feature of this hoarding disorder. But in order to have hoarding disorder, you have to have three things. And that is that you have to have a large amount of stuff And when you have an urge to save it, but then there's also distress if you get rid of it. So it's very upsetting, the thought of getting rid of it or being removed. That's one thing. And it's a large amount of things. The other one is when these things fill your rooms and outside portions and everything, and you cannot use it as it's originally intended. And then lastly is that the amount of things cause distress or problems with the day-to-day things you do. And so the countertop is a good example of that. If I had stuff stacked all over my kitchen and I couldn't use my stove and my microwave and my refrigerator for its intended purpose, those would all be 3 symptoms that have to be present, all 3 of these things, for it to be classified as hoarding disorder. And this came out of, you'll see the reference here with the OCD Foundation. I'm gonna give you some other resources. And so people collect all kinds of things. You'll see here newspapers, magazines, as we kind of do this work all around, clothing, books. And I have a dear friend, and when his mom died, she had a house in Chapel Hill and she had one in the mountains. And she had been running a ministry where they sent clothing over to Africa for people. And what happened was when COVID occurred, they quit being able to ship things. And so it kept accumulating and accumulating and accumulating. And when she passed away, he had no idea that the home was full to the brim, could not even be used because of the amount of clothing that was in there. And so that's an extreme situation where it had a good purpose initially, but it kind of just continued to grow and grow and grow to where it wasn't even usable, and he didn't even realize it. And he said, absolutely, please share that story. I want people to know that it can happen. The other thing is people collect all kinds of things, pots and pans, specialty items, bags, containers, and we talked about that usefulness, that they may say, well, one day I could use this or somebody could use that. But actually, it just keeps piling up and we never actually send it to anybody. It just kind of stays there. People do collect food, and we've seen this, especially with people that grew up during the Depression when food was scarce. The prospect that there would be food that, if a food is on discount at a grocery store, they may buy it and then they bring it in, but they never actually use it. And it just continues to pile up. So you can see here in this kitchen, there are food items all over. In this pantry, there's food items, and they're actually leaking because some of them are overflowing. And so those would be problematic things about collecting food. And then the saddest one of these is when they collect animals. And what we know about this is that in this situation, they start out wanting to help these animals, but unfortunately, because of animals and they have bodily functions. In some cases, they're not able to save all the animals due to disease. And also it becomes a hazmat situation for first responders because of the amount of urine and feces at these places. And it really, in some cases, you can't fix it because it's gone on so long. And so this certainly is one of the things that we see the most news stories on. I Googled it today, and you would not believe the cases in North Carolina of this. And I would say, since y'all are in the Charlotte area, I'm in the Raleigh area, there's even places down east that we've seen these stories. And so you can watch about this, but it is some of the saddest situations because they're able to save some animals sometimes, but they also have a foster issue and adoption issue because when those animals go in, they have to make sure they're well enough to be placed. And in some cases, they can't save the animals. So it's a very sad thing. So what are some indicators of hoarding disorder? Well, if you were to see these pictures, and this actually came out of my friend from Winston-Salem that they did a story on. This was his aunt's house that you can see here. But then the one in the middle, if you were to drive by somewhere or you were to pull up somewhere and you were to see that, you would probably immediately say, oh, there for sure is something going on here. I live, like I told you, just south of Raleigh. And when we go to the beach, we go down this certain road, and y'all, the porches are full of things and the outside is full of things. It's blocking the front door. And I'm always know the hazards of that home and the person. But then this is also an indicator of hoarding. Just because the outside of the home looks fine does not mean that when you open the door that there couldn't be huge issues. Some people are more discreet on the exterior than they are the interior because it's much easier to hide what's going on if you don't have the outward signs. So we have to be very mindful of the fact that you can't always tell from the outside what's going on. And some of the things that we find within these homes is that there can be major safety risk and structural problems when we have hoarding behavior going on. And the reason for that is the amount of stuff. We can have stairs and porches that, because of the amount of load that's put on them and the bulk of things, it can affect it. Leaking roofs, as we told you, people are not real crazy about folks coming in. If they come into your house and they see what's going on, there's a lot of shame with this. And so in lots of cases, they don't get home repairs that needed. So you can imagine a leaking roof will then damage the stuff inside. You'll have mold and mildew. Also, your electrical cords, you may have to, because you can't access the electrical outlet, you may run a cord. And you want, unfortunately, anytime you run extension cords, they're not designed for long-term use. But you can have exposed wires. In many cases, they may have no running water, because when they have plumbing problems, they don't invite people in to fix it. And so we have had multiple cases where they have a pot that they use instead of their toilet because of water. And it's such a sad situation. Having flammable items beside heat sources. In North Carolina, we're subtropic, so we can have warm weather from February to November, or we can have a cold spell. You just never can tell. And so we know that having things close to heat sources, they may be using a space heater because they can't use their central heating and air. They may use ovens or other appliances. And then caving walls, because of the amount of stuff that's piled up on it, it can also cause that. They may have no electricity or heat. And then, of course, some people will hoard ammunition or other types of things that they collect, and that can cause issues with hazardous materials and what we see with it. So we just see a variety of issues that happen. And then there's also a risk to your neighbors and the actual property adjacent to you. So we've had situations where this is actually a fire occurred that's on the right-hand side. But we have heard lots of stories of neighbors, either especially in like an apartment building or a multifamily, things that said, I cannot figure out why we can't get rid of the bugs. And what they find out is actually the adjacent property to it is actually having issues with hoarding. And as a result of that, they have infestation. So this is actually, this has actually several ones. The first one talks about they had a severe bed bug infestation because they weren't able to clean everything. And so that was one in New York City. Another one was they had a mom and a daughter, and they had been hoarding for over 20 years. And in that one, they actually had tons of rotting food. And so you can imagine the types of critters that come from that. Another one was an 80-year-old that was suffering from dementia, and instead of putting food in the refrigerator, was putting it in a drawer. So they had roaches that came into it. And then lastly, there was a customer that they had tons of stuff in their closets packed full, and the bed was piled high with things, and they took over 50 mice away from that. So you can imagine even exterminators are involved in this, and they go into people's homes, and when they have issues, they're called in. But it is a risk to the person, but also a public health risk to them, but also to their neighbors. And we found this. And you can imagine if you were living in some type of government assisted housing, and they find out that this is going on, there is a risk of eviction. And so what we find is that actually amplifies them trying to hide it, because you can imagine if this is going on, it's a mental health issue, and somebody finds out and you're already seeking help to be able to find a place to live, the threat of being evicted and having nowhere to go just amplifies this. And so we are very mindful of the fact that this is so complex. We also know that there is a real risk in the event that you have an emergency and a fire. And that is that if things are piled up all in your home, it is very unlikely that you can actually get out in an emergency. So this picture actually on the right-hand side is a single wide mobile home. And you can see that things are packed right up to the window, and these actually have roller windows instead of a traditional window. So you can imagine you don't have much room. And this gentleman actually died because he couldn't get out. his secondary entrance. He couldn't get out his first, which is traditionally a door, couldn't get out his second, which is a window. And what we find is I was doing a class in Wake County, and the firefighters were telling me that there was a home that had newspaper, was what they had actually hoarded, the item that they were collecting. And they got a fire call. Nobody knew if the person was there. It was a woman. She lived alone. The fire was actually started, and so they weren't sure if she was there or not. They called for her, did not find her, tried to make entry in the back, and eventually they had to do the front, and they had to put water on it. So you can imagine the water on the newspaper. It actually started collapsing. And so they had to keep putting water. So the fire load of it was humongous. Some cases, because of the amount of stuff, there's no oxygen. So it will actually smother the fire for a little bit, but when you start cleaning it out, it'll come back. So they actually got this fire extinguished, and they were overhauling the house. And I had a firefighter come up and talk to me, and he said, Kelly, this was the saddest thing because we were going in and out of the front door. Newspaper had collapsed, and we had to go in that way. And we started doing a search to see if we could find this lady. And as they overhauled the house, the newspaper had actually collapsed on her. And as they walked in and out, they were walking on her. And he was so upset because he said, we get into this business to help people. And we had no idea because of the amount of stuff that she was there and we couldn't get to her. And so this has such an effect even on people like you that are going into homes, but also the first responders. And we have to be aware of that, the life safety risk. It does increase the amount of fire load in that it increases the amount of time it takes to put the fire out. They can burn hotter, they can reignite. There's a lot of things that have to go into actually overhauling a home. If there were animals that were hoarded, there's also a hazmat issue. So there's a whole nother component of this. But we know that all of this is related to this topic. And we also know that it prevents a fall risk. So we talk about older adults and fire prevention and fall prevention. And unfortunately, when you have this much stuff, if you were to fall, things could actually collapse on you and you could be trapped. So there certainly is a fall risk. There also can be traumatic brain injuries from things hitting you in the head. And so we also talk about the fall risk and the fall hazard because they traditionally will have a little rabbit trail through that they know. And on any given day, they can go through there. But just imagine in an emergency, if one thing were to be out of place, it could be very, very harmful to you. And we know that the dangers to firefighters are the fact that if they have obstructed exits, they have things falling. It makes it very, very challenging, one, to find the person. So if the person's not waiting outside, or if their neighbors hadn't seen them and know that they're away, it is so hard for firefighters to fight the fire and also search for them because of the amount of stuff that's in these residences. And so what can we do? At the end of the day, it can be a very helpless feeling like, okay, Ellie, you talk about all these fire risks and we talk about fall risk and the amount of stuff. And this is an example of some folks that are actually helping. And I think that that is what today is all about, is how can all of us work together to help people that suffer from this disorder? And I will tell you that it's not a very quick thing. The other thing I will tell you is that people that suffer from this are people first. And we always talk about the fact that that's why we don't call them hoarders. We say people with hoarding behavior, people with a hoarding disorder, and it is because we want to show concern for their personal safety. They are someone's loved one. They are someone's child, someone's mother, someone's sister, somebody. And so we always want to be respectful and show concern for their personal safety first. We want to match the language that they're using. And so if they call it their lovies, if they call it my belongings, if they call it whatever word, we don't go in and say, you got a bunch of crap everywhere. That would be a total turnoff to anyone when you have a strong feeling about something and you're being devalued because of whatever bias we come into this situation with. The other thing is we want to focus on the safety issues, and that is our concern is if something were to happen, how do we get to you and help you? And what we find is in some cases that person may say, well, if something happens, I'm not worried about you. And we've had folks that come into their home that say, Well, I know you're not concerned about you, but what about the firefighters that are coming to help you? They have families and they could be injured as a result of this. And sometimes that may be the thing, or even if you're coming in and doing home safety visits and they have an attachment to you, you may be able to say, I'm concerned for you. I'm coming in here and I could actually fall and get hurt, or something could happen when both of us are here. So we want to focus on those. We want to be empathetic to the fact that, this doesn't happen overnight and it is a very stressful situation. And we want to use that person first language that we talked about. They are a person first and we're there and you're in this line of work like I am to make a difference. And so that is what we focus on and why you gave up part of your day to be here today. So we have a clutter rating that has been developed by many of the experts out there. And so you'll see that 1 is a very tidy room. 2 looks like probably what my kids' room looked like in the summer when I probably need to go in there and they probably need to pick up a few things. And you can see that it progressively gets worse. Like picture number 2, yeah, they forgot to put their laundry up that day. 3's getting a little worse, but by 4, there's so much stuff starting to accumulate. 5, there's no way for you to get in that bed. And 6, and it just gets progressively worse. So it gives you a clutter scale to be able to evaluate this. And then some other things you need to be aware of is the fact that progress can be slow. You've heard about surprise cleanups. Well, y'all, that is not a viable option. We don't do surprise cleanups. We don't go in and clean everything out because you haven't addressed the root problem. And you can do more damage than good when you do things like that. It's going to take many people helping us to find the motivation to make this happen because the individual has to come to the realization on why this needs to change. Me going in and saying, you need to do this, that might be fine and dandy, but that is not addressing the root issue of this. And that's why we have to make sure that we find what is their motivation. In some cases, if they have children, the motivation is the children can't stay there until this gets fixed. And so we incrementally make these improvements to that. But in many cases, it will be an ongoing visitation plan and it'll have to be revisited and done in stages because it involves many, many folks. When we talk about their stuff, we don't want you to touch their things and move their things. It really isn't helpful to you say, we can just take everything out of here and it'll be fine. We're going to focus on the safety aspect of it. We're going to talk to them about having working smoke alarms. We're going to talk to them about the people that come into their home. We want to talk about their home repairs, how this is their home. We want them to be able to stay there. And we want to imagine what it would be like if we were facing this. And as I said, some of you are facing this with a loved one. And so it is something that we need to be aware of and figure out how can we improve their safety and their living conditions so they can live there the longest and age in place. Because the older adults are one of the populations that's affected the most by this. So what are the messages that we concentrate on? We want to talk about working smoke alarms. That gives you the most time in the event that you have an emergency. Having smoke alarms inside and outside each bedroom, in each sleeping area of the home. I say sleeping area because not everyone sleeps in a bedroom. Some people sleep in alternative places in their home due to mobility issues or other things on each level of your home. So if you have multiple levels, having those in there. If possible, if you live in a home that has home fire sprinklers, if you live in an apartment, that can also help with it. Having an escape plan and making sure the exits are clear. If we can't do anything else in the beginning, can we make it so they can access a door and a window in each room so that they have a way to escape? And can we practice that escape plan one time during the day and one time at night? Because things look a lot different at night. What is their meeting place? Do their neighbors know about their meeting place? And then also for the fire service, we also talk about, is there a place within the CAD system or where 911 resonates that they can put a note that this home has excessive amounts of clutter in it? And that way they know that they need to pay special attention when they go there if they get a call. The other thing is making sure that combustibles are away from any of your heat sources. And then, of course, we're going to talk about fall prevention and injury prevention as part of this conversation. And so we want you thinking about a task force for people who hoard. And this is one of the things that started several years ago. We finally have seen a lot of efforts on this. Unfortunately, there is not a formal task force for hoarding at the North Carolina level anymore. Now, certain regions of the state do have those. They are housed in different places, but we don't have a state level one in North Carolina, but there are some resources close by that you can access. But having a hoarding task force is important, and you can do this in your community. The community level hoarding task force is really what will make the biggest impact, because you'll have housing folks involved. You'll have fire and public health and animal control. Professional organizing groups are wonderful with this, mental health professionals, and all of these working together can really make a difference with this mental health issue. And those are some of the primary partners that we want you thinking about, and adult services. And so this is the list of all the different people that would be on those task force. You may have code enforcement officials. You'll have community service providers, area agency on aging, adult services folks, healthcare and mental health, and even biohazard companies. So if you have restoration companies, they will know about this, because if you have an incident, they're going to be involved. You may have attorneys in your community, and certainly faith-based organizations. They have so many services. Doesn't matter what religion they are. Faith-based organizations have tons of community-minded people that like to go out there, and you'll also involve family members of people that have hoarding disorder. And so you'll see that the International OCD Foundation has a whole page that talks about hoarding task forces. It will give you this QR code that's on here actually will take you to that page. And so if you ever have questions, you can reach out to them. There's several, states that have these, multiple ones in certain states, but you can actually go to that QR code and go online and look at those resources through the International OCD Foundation. They have tons of resources on this. And then at NFPA, we have a ton of stuff too. The NFPA Journal, you can access online at nfpa.org and click on the journal. We did several articles on it. We have several tip sheets, one on hoarding and fire that you can grab and co-brand with us. Also one that's called Hoarding Issues for the Fire Service. And this month in our journal, there was actually an article on help for hoarding, and there's a podcast. So if you don't like to read, you can even listen to the podcast, and those are free. If you'll go to any listening platform and put hoarding, we put the NFPA podcast. You can actually find that. And then lastly, there is a hoarding handbook, and that actually is available online. It's been out for several years. There's a new version of it that's also available, but this is a great guidebook for health service professionals when we talk about this. And a lot of this presentation was developed from that hoarding handbook, because it is a great tool. And you'll also find that the OCD page will give you all kinds of information about what hoarding disorders are, the fact that symptoms can emerge at age 11. And so this will give you lots of information for family members. If you have a family member that hoards, if you're working with those family members, it's working with mental health folks. And you'll see across the top here, for families, they have resources, for professionals, for community responders, and they will provide lots and lots of resources on this topic. And then I did want to mention, this actually came out of a Steps to Safety training we did in North Carolina, the opportunity for me to speak with you. But at NFPA, we created a program called Steps to Safety. The first version of it was called Remember and Win, and it launched in 1999. This is the revised one, and it is a fire and fall prevention program that's free. And so if you go to this QR code, or if you go online to nfpa.org/steps to safety, you can go, and there's a 3-hour training module that's free that talks about fire prevention and fall prevention for older adults. There's message cards, there's PowerPoints, there's social media cards. And I know that September has Falls Awareness Week. You can actually grab some of these materials to use with your efforts there with your area agency on aging. What we're finding is that older adults 65 and older are adversely affected by fire and fall. Unfortunately, if in North Carolina, when we look at our fatalities, the majority, almost 80% of the fire fatalities in North Carolina are older adults. At age 65, you're 2 times more likely to die in a fire. At 75, you're 3 times more likely to die in a fire. And 85, you're 4 times more likely to die in a fire. So y'all, we got to get this message out. We have been training first responders all over the country. In North Carolina, we've held 3 of these trainings. We're probably going to do another one. But on the fire side, we know that we have got to get messaging out to older adults about fire prevention. We also know that falls are a huge part of what's affecting our older adults. 14 million, or 1 in 4 people 65 and older are going to have a fall. And this came from CDC data. In 2021, there were about 38,000 deaths of 65 and older and 3 million visits to the emergency department. And then the burden of it, the cost, is over 1.1 billion is the estimated cost of treatment by 2030. We also know that North Carolina is what we call in a silver tsunami. That is, tons of people are moving to North Carolina. They're living longer. But we also know that that provides a lot of services that are needed. And then our incident data shows that most fire service organizations have seen about a 35% increase in their assist and invalid or lift assist calls. And so that is why they're getting involved in fire and fall prevention. And we're partnering with community programs. And so we need you as members of the Area Agency on Aging and working with older adults to partner with our fire service to do this work. And we also know that the total health care cost for the non-fatal ones was over 80 billion in 1 year in 2020. And so this has a huge economic one. It also affects them being able to age in place. We want people to be able to age in place and live a wonderful life. And so we want to prevent their falls. And so I have a little video. I'm not going to show it, but it talks about steps to safety because I think we want to have time for questions, but you can grab these videos online. If you go to NFPA has a YouTube channel and you can go to NFPA and grab these. And so these programs, Steps to Safety, has a fire and fall prevention message, 8 of each. We partner with community service folks. We do group presentations. We do home visits. And the videos, as well as there's a video on home escape planning. There's a video on what is Steps to Safety. There's also a video on what to do if you fall and you aren't hurt, how to help yourself get up. And I love that video. That was one of the coolest things we developed, is what to do if you fall and you're okay, how to help yourself get up to be able to call for help. Social media assets. So we have lots of things you can use on all the social media platforms. And then also the online learning curriculum is up. That's a free 3-hour curriculum that you can actually grab, and all the materials are actually loaded on the website for Steps to Safety. I did want to talk to y'all just a minute. We have been pushing out a lot of information on calling 911 from a mobile phone. We are finding that more and more people do not have a landline phone. And so within every cell phone, and so I'm one of those people that I have 2. And I can tell you that my phone has a passcode to get on it. And a lot of times people are like, oh, the phone's locked. Like, what do I do? Well, every cell phone, whether in service or not, has the ability to call 911 from it. So this is actually a lesson plan that talks you through using the emergency call function right here on a cell phone. And so you can hit emergency, even if it has a passcode. If they hit emergency, it will allow them to dial 911. We also like to talk about the fact that if it calls 911, depending on what cell phone tower it pings off of, you might need to give them your physical address. In many cases, they'll be able to see it, but you also need to do that. But how to call 911 from a locked mobile phone is one of those things for kids all the way to older adults that we want to talk to them about. And you're one way that we can get that message out. And so I wanted to make sure to mention that to you. You can go online to Sparky's Schoolhouse, and you can actually find this PowerPoint. It talks about how to call 911. It talks about how to unlock it. And we even have a little lesson plan on calling 911 from a mobile phone. And so we would love for you to push that message out to older adults. Also making sure they have a sticker that says call 911. That's kind of old school, but it really isn't. What we're finding is I live in an area that our area code is 919. And we have had incidents where people in an emergency, because your adrenaline's flowing and it can be very disorienting when you're upset, have called 919 instead of 911. So having 911 written down in places in an emergency, call 911 when you're talking about educational materials that y'all have. That's a great way to make sure they know about that in their community. And then we're actually doing a webinar later today. I asked the girls with Centralina if I could tell you about this. This year's Fire Prevention Week theme is on smoke alarms and having working smoke alarms. And today we have a webinar on smoke alarms. It's 2 o'clock. Now you may have had enough of me and you don't want to see me anymore, but there's 2 other speakers that you can listen to. And we're going to talk to folks about smoke alarms, why it's important that they have them, because you're more likely to die in a fire if you don't have a working smoke alarm. And for older adults, this is really key. You can go to this QR code, it'll take you to it, or if you go to fpw.org, on the main page, it'll say register for the webinar. And if you miss it, we're going to record it and have it on our website afterwards. But if you have some free time today and want to learn more about what do we know about smoke alarms, you're going to be very worried when you see that older adults have the greatest risk when it comes to not having working smoke alarms. And so we know this is something that may be close to your heart. We also have tons of programs in North Carolina that can help people get smoke alarms. And so stay tuned. We have lots of resources through the State Fire Marshal's Office and the North Carolina Baptist Aging Ministry for smoke alarms. And we want you to know about those resources in case some of your customers may need them. And then here's my information, my email, my cell number. I am just right up the road in Fuquay, and I appreciate so much the opportunity to give this education today. I'm going to turn it over to Caitlin and Molly in case there's some questions that we have. I was not looking at the question box, but I know they were. And thank y'all again for the opportunity to be with this group today.
Thank you so much for being with us, Kelly. This was a great webinar. So I did put the Zoom link to your next webinar later today in the
thank
chat.
you.
So,
Okay, thanks.
so if anybody is available, let's see, I did see one question, and it is, what is the incidence of OCD and hoarding dual diagnoses, or is hoarding a subset of OCD?
So there actually can be concurrent things going on. So if you go to that International OCD page, there's also information through psychiatry.com that actually looks at those clinical diagnoses. So I am not a clinician, and so I wouldn't want to give that information. But in some cases, they do have multiple things going on at one time. So it is, in many cases, I don't remember the percentage, but there can be people that have this, but also they have other mental health issues that are commingled with it. But that page for the International OCD Foundation has lots of information on that. And they also have a hoarding fact sheet that's available on there. And so I strongly recommend you go there if you want to dig a little deeper into this topic.
Awesome. Let's see, anybody else have any questions? I see multiple thank yous and excellent
Oh.
webinars. But I don't see any more questions yet. But everybody, you have Kelly's information. If you think of something later and want to ask, you just shoot her an email.
Absolutely. And thank y'all for joining us today. Thanks, Centralina, for this opportunity. We really appreciate the opportunity to be with my people here in North Carolina. And like I said, if you do have time, jump on our webinar today. If not, we'll definitely have it recorded. And I hope you learned something. And I hope that if this is something that you are struggling with professionally or personally, I hope that you will now have the confidence to get help, because there is help and we know more about this. And so just know that there are many people that want to help you, and it is something that we have. It can take a while to do it, but we certainly have the ability to help people.
Absolutely. All right. Well, everybody, thank you for being with us today, and we hope we'll see you next time. Thanks again, Kelly.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.